whether or not it's you that derails it or makes sure that it's running on time and on budget. There are issues that arise that people don't want you to highlight. And I've been in those situations before where I know I'll be on the hook if it fails.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode with Tabeier Hamilton. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So, we're definitely going to talk a little bit about careers in project management. Tavior has had a wonderful career, and she has mostly had the privilege of being in a senior manager role within a PMO. And so all of you have sent questions in and had lots of, curiosity around, after I become a project manager and get my PMP, where can I go from here? Well, being a senior project manager in the world of project management, Tavior is going to give us some insight into what that looks like, what that sounds like, and maybe, hopefully, you tell us how we can prepare if that is our aspiration.
Okay.
Awesome. So, Tavier, what was your first role in project management, and how did it shape your understanding of the field?
So my first role in project management was probably at PepsiCo. And what I didn't realize was that it was really a portfolio manager. So as the commercialization engineer, and that's what the title was, we were not only responsible for executing the R&D aspects of the project, but we also managed the project. But I had tea, I had coffee, and I had still beverages and carbonated beverages.
Okay.
So several projects under each of those silos. So in total, it was probably about 50 projects, and I didn't even realize how much I was juggling. So it was a lot of not only project coordination, but also the execution. So we were going, traveling sometimes internationally to do trials. And then we also had to report into the oversight committee to help them understand, like you were speaking, high level overview of what the project entails, what are some of the risks.
Oh, wow.
And, sometimes it wasn't pretty, but what I learned quickly was that not only did you have to manage the risks, but you had to come to the table with a plan on how to address them. So I think that covers your question. So that was my first role, and that's how I, came to appreciate it more.
Definitely. I love the fact that you mentioned not only is it your job to share the risk, but you also have to come to the table with, we see this as a risk, and here's where we think the solution should lie. Or because executives in the world of project management, they pay you well, but they pay you well enough so that you come to the table with solutions. So that's extremely important. Yeah. For those of you thinking about being a portfolio manager or a senior manager on Tabier's level, please understand that it's never good enough just to come to the table with the problem. That on this level, you're getting paid to present executives with solutions.
So and the other thing to mention, though, is also sometimes people on the projects who are, some of the stakeholders don't want you to bring those problems. But ultimately, as a project manager, you're the one on the hook for the project's success. Right. Whether or not it's you that derails it or makes sure that it's running on time and on budget. There are issues that arise that people don't want you to highlight. And I've been in those situations before where I know I'll be on the hook if it fails. So I need to bring this forward to ensure that I get the support,
right,
the extra time if needed, the extra budget if needed,
right.
And we'll have to have a sidebar later as to why I needed to communicate that.
Right. So interesting enough, I'm so glad you brought that up because being a senior manager myself, I don't think I've been in a situation where the leadership didn't discourage me from sharing. We say good news is always good news, or bad news is good news if it's told early and often.
Correct.
And so I don't know that I've been in a situation where the bad news wasn't welcome, but I can certainly see that. different projects, different personalities, and everyone having a certain management style.
Right.
So what was that like for you, knowing maybe you've been in a situation where the leadership, they wanted you to be aware of it, but didn't necessarily want it communicated and the transparency of it to be there?
Well, in this situation, I realized there was going to be a problem. Just a quick background, there was an ingredient that wasn't working during manufacturing, and we needed to pivot to a different ingredient.
Mm.
And marketing was like, well, this is going to hold the project up, and that can't happen. And I'm like, well, I understand that, but it's not going to work. And so we need to pivot, and I need to bring this up on Thursday's meeting.
Right.
And she was like, well, I would discourage you from doing that.
Wow.
And I said, well, I'm sorry. And so we got on the call. I was presenting. I told them, what the issue was and how we were preparing to address it. And she called and, had some nice words after
Wow.
the call. And so I said, well, I understand your position. And I had to keep my cool because, it was quite contentious. But in the end, we ended up launching a little early on time. And I attribute that to realizing what the issue was, making a mitigation plan to address it,
Right.
and moving forward with that plan.
Awesome.
So,
I love that. So not only are we learning about, making strategic decisions, because that was a decision that you were advised not to make, but it takes a level of boldness to be a senior
yeah.
manager. It takes a little bit of gutsiness. And
Yeah.
so,
And communication, right?
Yes.
The right communication, empathy. I understood where she was coming
Right.
from because she felt like her project was on the line, but we needed to highlight it. So we
yes.
did.
Awesome. So I know you told us about that role. So tell us a little bit about how senior project management in the world of us being a senior manager in the world of project management, how that differs from a project manager or a portfolio manager. What's the difference there in your mind?
From my experience, I feel like you're not while you need to understand the day to day and the details, you're more at a strategic vision level and executing what some of the business objectives are and translating that into tactical aspects and making sure that the team is delivering or, executing what their piece of it is. So it's less tactical, more strategic, but I did have to be involved in the tactical pieces of it.
Okay. And so since you've done both roles, which one do you prefer?
I think I preferred being at the strategic level.
Okay.
The tactical could get kind of redundant. And I think having, in my at PepsiCo, when we were managing different silos of brands, so to speak, you got a little bit of flavor, no pun intended, but, flavor for what, different projects could be. And then sometimes we had projects where we were managing a construction, of new equipment or the installation of new equipment. So managing the vendor. So you get a little more flavor when you're at the strategic level versus being at the tactical level.
Yes, I love that. And when we think of strategic in your everyday, how does that show up? Let's say, you clock on at 8 o'clock. So being a senior manager, tell me some strategic decisions or strategic activities that you may go through in a day.
Using consumer insights, using research, or looking at what the strategic vision is for that year, that quarter, and understanding how the projects that could be on the table could lend themselves to augmenting that or contributing to the bottom line and in those strategic pillars. So just thinking about, each of the projects, how they align with the strategic vision, and from a tactical standpoint, what you need to put in place to execute that.
Oh, okay. So for our project managers out there in project management land, when Tavier and I worked together at Snyder's Lance, it is now called Campbell's. And I strategically or distinctively remember that you and we managed the same project. It was called PLM. I developed the training manual, trained about 16 lines of businesses, and was responsible for a small team of 5 people who keyed in all the data that we were putting on this new platform. And then you kind of was my right hand on the other side of that. And so tell us a little bit about that particular role and your experience at now Campbell's.
So managing PLM, that was so my first day at Campbell's is when they launched the software. So getting up to speed was like drinking water through a fire hose.
Yes.
But then, you know, in tangent with the training, I was also responsible for process improvement. So getting in there, understanding that, and that was when I was probably most in the weeds because I had to understand what all of the users were experiencing. So literally sitting with them and say, okay, what's your process? What are some of your pain points? And then having vision board sessions to say,
Yeah.
if you had it, if it could be ideal, what would it look like to you?
Right.
And then going back to the vendor and saying, this is what we're seeing. How can we make this a little more functional for marketing, for
Right. Right.
regulatory, for whoever the function was. So
Packaging. Yeah.
was yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, that was probably the big one, packaging and regulatory, right? With
Yep.
all the specs and the data that had to be
Yes.
entered. Oh, taking me back.
Yes.
Uh,
Down memory lane
yeah.
for sure.
So I think that was probably a healthy blend of tactical and strategic because you were not only understanding what each function, how they used it, what was a problem for them, and then just coming up with ways to process improve.
I brought that example up because when you were describing the balance between what a senior project manager does and what a portfolio project manager does, it just immediately drew this image of you and I working together. How I was the more tactical partner with on the project. And of course, you were meeting with the different lines of businesses, the heads, and you were trying to understand, like you said, what their pain points were. You were having the vision board sessions. And so, hopefully, to our listeners, that describes the kind of seesaw balance of the different roles. And even though I wasn't a portfolio manager on that project, there would be a portfolio manager, if you will, that would still have some of that tactical responsibility. And it gives you a really like draws a line of delineation between what strategic might look like, what some strategic activities look like versus what the tactical activities look like. I still have nightmares, Tavier, on I think I spent 21 hours developing the training manual that I put together for you guys. And I worked on it 21 hours straight. And I never forget, my husband came down to check on me. And I just felt so horrible after that. But um, talk a little bit about work life balance, because I can imagine when we have those moments and projects are really huge and significant for the company, there may be times that you have to dig in,
Yeah,
but then
yeah.
there's going to be times I'm sure that you have the regular 9 to 5 experience.
Right. And just the fact that you said dig in just lends itself to, understanding that there is a balance. And sometimes you have to go deep and stay long hours. And sometimes, and that's where empathy comes in too, right? I've had people on my team where I know they have an issue going on, but that's me in terms of, having camaraderie with people and understanding what may be going on outside of work to
Mm-hmm.
then say, okay, I get that. Let me dig in for a moment. And then, someday the role might be reversed. We all have
Right.
families. We all have, a lot of us are living in the sandwich generation. We have elders to take care of
That's
and
right.
kids,
That's right.
school activities that you want to be a part of. And so just that balance and having a team that knows that you as a leader are understanding of where they are in their life, and where you might be able to step in and dig in a little deeper when they need to be shallow for a moment. I think that all, lends itself to a healthy team.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, let's talk a little bit about leadership qualities. What would you say would be essential for a senior manager to be effective in guiding their team?
Empathy, for sure. Visionary, somewhat detail oriented. I know at the tactical level, they are the more detail oriented, detail oriented partners. But I think you understanding the detail, especially when you have to report up to senior leadership,
Right.
gives you enough detail to be able to speak to it on a broader level. So I think both strategic, visionary, empathy, and just understanding the details on a tactical level.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
Empathy being number one, though.
Yes, always
And
the
communicative.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. I go back to some of my previous experiences, and it just have you ever had a role where you were maybe a senior manager without having direct reports?
Yes, the one at Campbell's.
Okay.
So I didn't have any direct reports, but everyone internal was my customer. And so while they didn't report to me, essentially I reported to them because I was trying
That's
to
right.
understand what their needs were. And I had my deliverables, but they were based on my customers.
That's right. That's right. So you had internal customers,
Correct.
and not necessarily team members.
Right.
Right. Certainly know what that feels like. So, what would you say your superpower would need to be in that instance?
Understanding, patience, because sometimes people can't articulate what their pain point is. And so I think the patience that I had with sitting with people for sometimes hours on end, to understand what the steps were that they needed to take, if there were gaps in information, being collaborative and knowing where to help them get that information. And then also with regard to patience, I always told people, if you try, I will help you as many times as you need, especially if, there's something that you don't understand, I'll work with you to get it done. But if you're not trying, I can't really help you.
That's right.
And so I think empathy and patience, top.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. And I know because I was in the room, your peers respected you.
Thank you.
Everybody really valued your opinion. They listened when you talked. And so that's a testament of the influence that you had. That's the word I was looking for. I believe when you're a senior manager and you do not have direct reports, your superpower in my mind would be influence. You need
That's a
to be
great
able
one.
to positively influence the people around you. I would always say, if I needed to call my VP or my director at 3 a.m. in the morning, I want them to look at their cell phone and I want them to see Cass and I want them to want to answer.
That's good.
Yeah. Even though
really
they're going to
good.
get the sleep out their eye, they're going to clear their throat. Because they see my name, I want them to want to answer the phone. And if that dynamic happens and that's the relationship you're able to cultivate, then I feel like that you've hit your sweet spot and you're doing your job.
Right. I totally agree with that. There were plenty of times where I could pick up the phone and call a plant, and they would answer, but it was because I had been there and like really worked on cultivating a relationship with them
Right.
so that they trusted me and knew that I was there not only to get the overall job done, but to help them as well.
Right.
So I had told, and reward. I think that's always a good one too.
Yes.
Because when I would ask people to sit in for these 3-4 hour long vision board sessions,
Right.
we'd have fun in there too.
Right.
And, I'd reward them with food or whatever I had to do.
Absolutely. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with the little sugar. Yeah, you can bribe people with sugar for sure. Absolutely. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I have learned so much about some of the roles that you have had. What would you say is the biggest challenges in facing that PMOs face today? I know you've worked in some PMOs, you've worked outside of some PMOs. So as a senior manager, how would you help to address some of those challenges?
What are some of the big challenges? I think in terms of a broad sense, if there are, depending on how many projects there are, balancing stakeholders' expectations with motivating the folks who are, right alongside you executing. I think that's the biggest one.
Wow.
And so there again, empathy, communication, collaborating with people. There were instances where, if something from a tactical level wasn't going well, because I was in the weeds, I didn't need to be to report up, but I needed to get alignment, for folks that I was working alongside. So being able to be in those details and step in when something goes wrong. There was an instant, I love to tell stories. However, there was an instance where we were looking at some copy on film for packaging, rather. And I noticed something that was wrong. And I did not want to throw my colleague under the bus,
Right.
but we had to have a plan. And I knew if I brought forward the plan, it would be seen as, well, that's not your responsibility. So I went to my manager, who I trusted very much, and we kept that between us. And then we worked with the person who was ultimately responsible for the error to get it corrected. And then when I was able to report it, I would say, here's the issue. We're all aware. And this person who's responsible has come up with this plan.
Awesome.
So
I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's managing both ends of the spectrum.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that brings me to another point. Sometimes being in a strategic role, you don't necessarily get all the glory. And it's okay. I think if you're going to be in that role, so if you're considering being a senior manager and you're the person that likes to always get the award and your name called in the meeting, this may not be the position for you, right? Because you're the thought leader behind the scenes, oftentimes, really working solutions out. And you're sharing those solutions and trying to push them off on other people to grasp as their own.
Right.
So you have to be really influential and strategic.
How to motivate people.
That's right. To make people think, oh, this was your idea.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's how you get buy-in.
Absolutely. So again, this has been wonderful. We must catch up more often. I admire you so much. I look at you as
Likewise.
one of the giants in the field. And so I know your career is going to go well. It's going to go far. And I'm looking to hear just wonderful things to come from you.
Thank you. So, thank you for having me. This was so great.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, there you have it, folks. We have, again, another podcast at Project Mentor Pro where we've talked to you about what it takes to be a senior project manager. I hope you enjoy. Everyone have a great night.